Vincent Thomas was 40 years old when his wife sat across from him at the kitchen table on a Thursday evening, told him she was done, said he had never been anything but a comfortable arrangement she had outgrown, and told him, her exact words, delivered with the composed finality of a decision that had been made and rehearsed, that she was firing him from her life. He had looked at her for a long moment. He had said, "Okay, Nicole." She had taken this as confirmation that he had nothing to say for himself, which was one of several calculations she made that evening that would not survive the next 60 days. He drove a 5-year-old Lexus with a water bottle in the cup holder from March and wore button-down shirts he bought at the same store he had used for 15 years. And his home office in their house in Sugar Land, Texas, was described by Nicole to her friends as just where Vincent does his investment stuff. She had decided who he was the first year she knew him, and the weight of that decision had accumulated on her side of the ledger, while the other side had been doing something she had not thought to examine. She had moved $38,000 from their joint accounts over 11 months. She had a business partner she had told Vincent was strictly professional. She had a new office lease for Elevate Brand Co., signed under her name alone, a plan that required no input from him, and the particular confidence of a woman who believed she was standing on ground she had built entirely by herself. She had absolutely no idea whose name was on the operating agreement of the fund that held 19% of her company. What was about to happen in the offices of Claudette Osei on Main Street would cost Nicole Thomas the one certainty she had been building her new life around. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning light came into the home office on Dunley Drive at 6:30 in the way Vincent had organized his mornings around, low through the east window, landing on the wide maple desk he had bought at an estate sale and refinished himself over a Thanksgiving weekend. The grain brought out by the work in a way the original finish had never managed. The desk was where every day began. 1 cup of coffee, 1 legal pad, a portfolio review that most of the people in his social orbit would have described in the vague language of investments, which was accurate and also as incomplete as a blueprint was to a finished building. He worked in private equity and venture investment, had been doing it since 28, starting as an analyst at a Houston fund specializing in energy-adjacent businesses and working upward through 12 years of sourcing, due diligence, term sheets, and the particular mathematics of what an early-stage company was actually worth versus what it believed itself to be worth. At 35, he had formed Meridian Venture Partners, a private fund he managed with 2 partners, modest in institutional size and careful in discipline, with a portfolio of 22 investments and a return history that had made them selective. The fund was not mentioned in any public directory. It appeared in no social media biography. It was the kind of operation that communicated only to the people it needed to communicate with, and communicated with them through returns. The work required a kind of patience that did not announce itself, and a specific skill, reading the gap between what a company presented and what it actually was. He had applied this skill to every deal he had touched for 12 years. He had been applying it quietly to the situation in his marriage for longer than Nicole had been preparing her exit. His mother, Evelyn Thomas, was 67 years old and lived in the same house on Tom Street in Houston's 3rd Ward that she had owned since 1981. A brick house with a garden in the back and a clarity of perception that had never softened and that Vincent had relied on more times than he could count. She had told him once, watching him prepare for a difficult presentation when he was 22, Vincent, the loudest person in the room, usually ran out of real things to say. You keep sitting there with what you actually know. He had met Nicole at a Houston industry gala in 2017. She was in marketing at a boutique brand consulting firm, sharp and confident and genuinely skilled at reading what a brand needed to communicate. He had admired that about her, the specific intelligence she brought to her work, and the energy she moved through professional rooms with, and the way she asked questions that got to the point. They had married in 2018 and had, for the first 3 years, built something he thought was real. She launched Elevate Brand Co. in 2022, and he had watched her build it with the attentive interest of a person who understood what building something actually required. And he had felt, through most of that period, something close to pride. It was only in the final year that he had begun to understand that the person she was building toward had always been someone other than who she was when she came home. In the summer of 2023, Elevate Brand Co. had come through a Houston entrepreneurial accelerator looking for its first institutional seed investment. The deal was presented to Meridian's investment committee. Strong founder, differentiated positioning, solid early revenue, favorable terms. The committee had approved a 19% stake. The presenting associate had not known who Nicole Thomas was. Vincent had recognized the company name on page 2 of the deck and the founder photograph on page 4, and had said nothing. He had excused himself from the formal vote to avoid any appearance of conflict, but the committee had passed it 4-0 without his vote, and the investment had proceeded on its merits. He had been a silent partner in his wife's company for 14 months before she told him she was firing him from her life. On the wall of his home office, among a cluster of deal materials and framed term sheets, was a Meridian Venture Partners portfolio summary card for Elevate Brand Co. The deal terms, the percentage, the date of close, the projected return scenarios. Nicole had walked past it hundreds of times. She had never asked what Meridian was. In private equity, the value was never on the surface. You had to read what was underneath before you knew what anything was worth. He noticed the pattern in October, not all at once, but in the specific accumulation of small details that a trained pattern reader registered before naming. 3 evenings when Nicole arrived home later than her calendar explained, with a composed account of the extra hours that had been prepared in advance. A weekend conference that produced no materials and no colleagues he could verify. A Thursday he had come home early and found the house empty and her phone going to voicemail for 2 hours in a way that was not consistent with poor signal. He pulled the joint bank records. $38,000 out across 11 months, routed through a payment platform in amounts structured below the threshold of casual attention. The receiving account resolved through a business registry search to a limited liability company in Harris County with a single registered principal, Devin Parks, a commercial real estate developer whose name appeared on 3 Midtown Houston projects and in 2 industry event photographs alongside Nicole. He ran the standard background. Parks held a commercial real estate license in Texas in good standing, had been the subject of one civil dispute settled 2 years prior, and had a social media presence that communicated the specific prosperity of a man investing heavily in how he appeared. He went through the records with the methodical patience he brought to a due diligence process, building the picture before drawing conclusions, noting everything, assuming nothing. He documented the bank transfers against his own travel calendar, every amount against the week, every week against his own whereabouts. He cross-referenced the business registry, the licensing database, and the publicly available transaction history. He opened a project file on his secure drive and named it simply Nicole. His hands did not shake. His face remained perfectly calm. He spent 3 days documenting before he called anyone. On the 4th day, he called Claudette Osai, a Houston family law attorney he had retained briefly for an unrelated business matter 2 years prior, and whom a colleague had described as thorough, which was the quality he valued most. He brought the Meridian Fund documents, the Elevate Brand Co. operating agreement, and the joint account records to her office on Main Street. Claudette reviewed everything for 40 minutes without speaking. The Meridian stake in Elevate, she said, looking up. 19%. Silent partner. She has no idea. She knows a fund called Meridian Invested, Vincent said. She does not know I control Meridian. Has she ever reviewed the fund's operating document? No, she dealt with our associate throughout the investment process. I was not present for any of the meetings. Claudette set her glasses on the desk. When she files, and based on everything you've shown me she is planning to file, her attorney will request full financial disclosure. The Meridian documents will surface. The portfolio holdings will be produced. She paused. She is going to find out. I know, Vincent said. Do you want her to find out in my conference room or somewhere else? He thought about the portfolio card on his office wall. He thought about 14 months of investment updates that had crossed his desk without Nicole once asking what Meridian was. In your conference room, he said, when the documents are in front of everyone. One more thing, Claudette said. She turned to the joint account summary. The $38,000. The LLC registered to Devon Parks. She tapped the page. This is documented dissipation of marital assets, and the timeline, beginning approximately 2 weeks after you mentioned the Denver project, suggests it was deliberate and structured. Her attorney is going to arrive at this conference expecting to discuss the valuation of the Elevate stake. They are not expecting to also discuss 11 months of structured transfers to a third party. She looked at him. The full picture is considerably different from the picture she has been planning around. Vincent nodded. Good, he said. She had no idea what the full picture contained, or how different it was from the one she had been building her exit on. Every deal had a moment where the true structure became visible. He had always been patient until that moment arrived. Claudette prepared the full disclosure package over the following week. Vincent drove that Saturday to his Uncle Desmond's house in Kashmere Gardens. His father's older brother, 64, retired from 28 years as a structural welder, a man of physical patience and very few unearned opinions. Desmond met him in the driveway with a thermos of coffee and the wordless acknowledgement of a man who had already received the broad outline through the family network and was waiting for the specifics. They sat on the back porch, and Vincent told him all of it. Desmond looked at the yard for a long time. She started a company, he said. Yes, and you've been on the cap table. Yes, Desmond shook his head slowly. You've been investing in people's potential for 15 years, and she never once thought to ask what you saw when you looked at her. He set the thermos down. Some people look right past what they're standing next to. He looked at Vincent. You already know what to do. I do. Do it clean. Let the paperwork carry the weight. It doesn't need anything from you on top of it. Vincent sat with his uncle for a while longer. The yard was quiet. 2 houses down someone was running a lawnmower. He thought about the first time Desmond had put a welding rod in his hand, at 14, and told him that the joint would hold exactly as well as he made it hold. Not better, not worse, and no amount of confidence would substitute for the work itself. He had remembered that lesson in every deal he had ever done. He drove home that evening and sat at his desk and reviewed the Meridian portfolio documents one last time, confirmed the documentation was complete, and called Claudette to confirm the scheduling. That Thursday, Vincent came home to find Nicole preparing for a client dinner. Dressed and composed and moving through the house with the forward-looking energy of a woman who had already, in her own mind, left, she asked about his week with the polite interest of someone managing a transition they considered complete. He said the week had been fine. He asked about Elevate. She talked about a new client acquisition for 7 minutes. A regional retail chain, a strong retainer, good creative brief. and he listened with the full attention he had always given her, asking 2 questions that showed he had been listening, and she answered them easily, and the conversation had the practiced surface of 2 people being civil, and she did not notice anything different about him, because there was nothing different about him to notice. He cleared his plate. He went to the office. He looked at the portfolio card on the wall, Elevate Brandco, the terms, the percentage, the date of close, and he thought about what it meant to build something without knowing who had been standing underneath it from the beginning. Some things required no announcement. They simply waited to be read correctly. The financial disclosure conference was scheduled for a Wednesday morning at Claudette Osai's office on Main Street. Nicole arrived with her attorney, Gerald Finch, a thorough and confident man who had done his research, and arrived with a document request list he had clearly spent considerable time preparing. He had not known to search for Meridian Venture Partners by name. Claudette opened the disclosure with the Meridian Fund documents, the operating agreement, the full portfolio list, the current valuations, and placed the Elevate Brandco investment page on the table in front of each party. The deal terms, the percentage stake, the fund entity, the managing member. Nicole looked at the portfolio page. She looked at the name of the fund's managing member. She looked at Vincent. Gerald Finch reviewed the page twice. He wrote something on his legal pad. He looked at his client with the expression of an attorney who has encountered a fact not accounted for in his preparation. Meridian Venture Partners, Claudette said. At her level, Precise Pace is a private investment fund managed by Vincent Thomas, who holds a controlling interest through a holding company. The fund made a seed investment in Elevate Brandco in the summer of 2023 in exchange for a 19% equity stake. Your silent investor has been your husband. The room went very quiet. Nicole looked at Vincent with the expression he had seen on Founders in a due diligence meeting when the actual numbers landed on the table for the first time. The expression of a person who has been calculating on one set of assumptions and has just been shown the real ones. Something behind her eyes moved through several adjustments in rapid sequence, and then stilled. You never told me, she said. The investment was made on its merits by my investment committee, Vincent said. Your company presented well. It was a sound call. You were in my company this entire time and you never said anything. You never asked what Meridian was, he said. He was not angry. He was accurate. These had always been different things for him. It has been on my office wall since the month after the investment closed. You walked past it for 14 months without asking. You decided who I was the first year you knew me, and you spent the next 6 being right about the parts that were convenient and not looking at anything else. Gerald Finch asked for a recess. He did not receive one. Claudette produced the Meridian portfolio valuation, audited, certified, the historical baseline at the time of the marriage and the current figure. She produced the independent valuation of the Elevate Brandco. Stake, the number on that last page, was the one that required a second look from Gerald Finch's side of the table, and then a third. Nicole's last argument, through her attorney, was that Vincent's undisclosed involvement in her company constituted a conflict of interest that should void the investment. Claudette had anticipated this argument specifically. The investment had been made through an arm's-length institutional process. Nicole had signed the investment documents, which included Meridian's standard disclosure language noting the fund's structure. No confidential information had ever moved between Vincent and the fund in connection with Elevate. The argument lasted 4 minutes. Vincent stood when it was time to stand. He collected his folder. He buttoned his jacket. Elevate is a good company, he said. My fund believed in it before you told me I had nothing. The valuation proves we were right." He paused. "I am transferring the stake back to you as part of the settlement. It was always yours to run. I just wanted you to know what it was worth while you were telling me I wasn't worth anything." He walked to the door. He did not look back. 11 months later, Vincent Thomas sat on the back porch of a renovated townhouse in Midtown Houston, a 3-story property he had purchased in January, and spent 4 months restoring with a small weekend crew, and a focus that had felt like the right use of his attention during those early months of the year. The reclaimed hardwood floors had been sourced from a demolition site in the Heights. The kitchen had been rebuilt from the studs. The back porch cedar boards he had laid himself on a February Saturday when the work needed to be physical, and he needed to see something finished at the end of the day. He had moved in May and had been filling the rooms slowly, the way a person filled space when they were being deliberate about what belonged in it. A woman named Fatima sat beside him at the outdoor table with a contract review open in front of her and a cup of coffee she had set aside without drinking, which was a habit Vincent had learned meant she was deep in the reading and would return to the coffee when she surfaced. She was a corporate attorney who specialized in mergers and acquisitions at a firm downtown, and they had met at an entrepreneurs' roundtable in March, where she had been speaking on deal structure, and he had asked a question from the audience that led to a conversation after the panel that had not found a natural stopping point over coffee, then dinner, then a walk along the bayou that had gone on longer than either of them had planned. She was specific and unhurried, and genuinely interested in the things that were actually worth being interested in. She asked questions that assumed competence and gave answers the same way. She had been here, at this table and in this house, for about 5 months. The Meridian portfolio had grown to 26 investments by November. The third fund raise had closed in September, the largest of the 3. Drawn from a mix of returning and new institutional investors, the kind of growth that did not require noise and did not produce it. His 2 partners had hired 2 additional associates. The Elevate Brand Co. stake had been transferred to Nicole, as stated in the settlement. Clean, documented, complete. Vincent had not thought about it since the day the paperwork closed. From what he heard through the Houston business community, Elevate was doing well. New accounts, a larger team, a second office in the works. He had no feelings about this in either direction. She had the company. She had always had the talent for it. What she had not had was an accurate accounting of what she was standing next to while she built it. Devin Parks had relocated to Dallas after the proceedings concluded. Vincent had heard this once and registered it, and moved on. Desmond had called the week the settlement closed to say he was glad it was done cleanly, which was the way he expressed everything that needed to be expressed. Evelyn Thomas, when Vincent drove to 3rd Ward to tell her in person, had said she was not surprised about any of it, and that she was proud of how he had handled himself. That was all she said about the handling of difficult things, and from her, it was everything. He pressed the cedar board under his boot. Sound. Even. True. Fatima set down the contract review and picked up her coffee and looked at the evening, which was doing what Houston evenings did in late fall, warm and still, the air finally reasonable. The city settling into itself after the long push of summer. The kind of evening worth sitting through to the end without explanation. He had built everything worth keeping. He was not looking back. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.